their side of the table, there were three people. There were the two business partners, who, by the way, are both bankers. And then next to them was their attorney. On our side of the table was youth pastor Jon and his pregnant wife. To say there was a power mismatch at this table would be the understatement of the world. Have we built a side project, or have we started a tech company?
When is the right time to make a side hustle your main gig? Say you get something off the ground and then someone comes along and slides that little piece of paper across the table and says, hey, I want to buy your company for this amount. Would you take the money? Do you actually, say, hey, I could actually grow this thing beyond what this guy's offering for me? And then what do you do if the Lord's telling you, no, now is not the right time? Or your spouse says, I think we should take that amount. Today's guest, Jon VerLee, walked through each one of those journeys. So I think you're going to really love this episode. I'm Mike Sudyk, and this is Faith and Tech. Jon VerLee, thanks for being here, man. I'm really glad you're here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
So you are becoming or already a local celebrity in Grand Rapids for tech startups, but mostly because you're like growing the ecosystem. That's what I see. I see you hustling every day on LinkedIn and all these things you're doing to grow the ecosystem. A lot to do with Calvin. I know you're doing the startup garage, but you're just trying to build an ecosystem, which is not easy, right?
I'm not sure the word celebrity has been used many times in my past, but I'm honored and thank you. But that's exactly right. My passion is to help founders take that next step in their journey, and specifically founders who have that Christ-centered drive to do what they do. And a Christ-centered founder, we simply define as someone who wants to meaningfully integrate their Christian faith into their work. It looks very different for different people, but there is a common core there in integrating those two parts.
So what makes you qualified to do that?
Well,
so take me back to the beginning.
There's been quite a journey here. Let's actually go back to just the tail end of high school, if we can.
All right.
High school, I grew up in West Michigan, attended a great high school, but I was not necessarily at my peak, you might say, during those years. In fact, high school, the first half of it in particular, was a rather challenging time for me, just in terms of figuring out who I was, and certainly figuring out who Christ was to me. The short version of this first half of high school is my life took a bit of a nosedive, confusing the place that God should have been in my life and trying to fill that with a girl. That crashed and burned in spectacular ways. And it was the aftermath of that that really allowed me to lean into asking, all right, who is Jesus and what does that mean for me personally? And so as I stepped out of high school into college, I had this big passion not only to live a Christ-centered life, because that is where I found so much life and so much healing in the years prior, but also then to pour into the upcoming generation of middle school and high school students who were a few years behind me and help them on their own journey. And so I attended Calvin University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And in tandem with that, I really leaned into local ministry in our local church. And so my freshman year of college, I got involved leading a group of squirrely 6th, 7th, and 8th grade boys at a local church, and I absolutely loved it because I was far enough removed from that stage of life that I felt like I had some perspective and something to offer. And to help direct them when they're kind of going off the rails or chasing anything but God, be it status or popularity or girls, and to say, hey, guys, this is where life is found. It's not in what the world points to. And so I really enjoyed that. And as I went on in my academic career, I became more and more convinced that ministry is what I wanted to do. To the tune that after graduating undergrad, I went on to seminary and went on staff at this same church.
Wow.
And really, really enjoyed this journey.
Now, can I stop you there?
Please.
So you, it sounds like that was a journey to come to that conclusion. Did you have like different intended desires when you're going into college before that? Or, being that you're an entrepreneur, did you have other entrepreneurial stints early in your life, maybe pre-college, that kind of guided a little bit of the later stages of journey after that? Could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I think that entrepreneurs, while it may be tough to capture in the moment, when they look back at the wake behind them, they see these different entrepreneurial bumps along the way that have been trying to express themselves. In high school, I tried to start a web development company with a friend. We got a total of $0 and 0 clients, but we had a pretty cool website. And so,
like a lot of startups, that they have a cool website, but they don't get customers.
Yep. Later in high school, I started an online kind of messaging platform. This was pre-Facebook, pre-social media, really. It was back in the MySpace days. And so I started this platform, and it became kind of this social hub for my immediate friends. And my claim to fame is that our high school actually banned the website because it was becoming such a distraction. And so I felt pretty good about that. Yeah. Neither of those were either successful companies necessarily, but it was fun to lean into that. I got into when I was in college and studying. Calvin didn't have a youth ministry degree, so I was studying psychology and heading that route, which I think is a great route still for people who want to go into ministry. But I hit this point where there was a required psychology class on a Wednesday night, and that is when I was volunteering, not working, volunteering at the church with these middle school students. And so I did what seemed to be the most logical thing to me, is I changed my major and so that I could continue on at the church. But I think there's an important point there. We as a culture, put so much emphasis on the academic side of life, especially in those first 18, 22 years of life. And in reality, the thing that shifts your future more than anything else outside of God's direction is the experiences that we have. And so if there's a field that you love, oh my goodness, lean into it. Start volunteering in it. Start talking to as many people as you know who are in there. I look back and I would say one of the best decisions for my academic career was to switch majors, to stay plugged into the church that ultimately I would go on to work at, and is even more integral to the story, as I'm sure we'll get to. Yeah.
No, that's one of the things I always tell people, like when I'm talking to either new high school graduates or someone that's in college, or preferably before that, is like, if you think you want to go into something, go have conversations with like 5 of those people. If you think you want to be an engineer, go talk to 5 of those people. Go take them out to lunch. Ask them to lunch. They'll probably pay for it. You'll learn so much about what do they do day in and day out. But really try to expedite that learning instead of just saying, hey, this test told me I should do X and I'm just going to go on this path. You need to go down those paths a little bit to explore things you're interested in, because you never know. You don't know what you don't know is the old adage, right? And so I think that's wise advice.
And shadow them, see what they do. So if I can lean into that a little further as the story goes on, it was about 3/4 of the way through seminary where my now wife, Carrie, and I got engaged. And she was off in grad school in Ann Arbor, over on the other side of the state. I was in Grand Rapids here on the west side of the state. And I was ready, Mike. I was ready to get married. Let's get these rings and move on to the next stage of life. And I figured out that if I quit my job at this church that had treated me so well and I had sacrificed my major for, if I quit my job, I could move to Ann Arbor, and we could get married 6 months earlier than if I waited until she finished and then came back to Grand Rapids. And so, in my not quite developed prefrontal cortex, I thought, great idea, let's go for it. So quit my job, got married, moved out to Ann Arbor, and we started life together. Now, here's where this connects. In seminary, I went specifically into counseling, into studying how to be a counselor. And I thought I really enjoyed that. And the way that I was able to quit my job early is I found 2 counseling internships in Ann Arbor. And so I could basically finish out there. And so moved out to Ann Arbor and started these internships. I discovered within a couple of weeks, I don't want to be a counselor. Come on.
Like a moment.
Come
like you're like,
on.
I just like put all this time in, and now what
I'm
am I gonna
literally
do?
at the end of my grad school career, of my seminary career, and I had not, other than just dabbling, being a client in a counselor's office, I had not experienced what that counseling office felt like. I liked youth ministry. Counseling seemed adjacent to that, but it was not experientially. And so while I have a high regard for the profession of counseling, it was not for me.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden I found myself with all of that entrepreneurial wiring in a city where I don't know anybody other than my wife. And she, by the way, was, in addition to school, was working at a cholera lab at the time, which practically meant that her work hours were dictated not by anything related to 9 to 5 or the clock in general. It was dictated by the half-life of bacteria. And so when that spinner would spin down, she would need to go. And I basically just had a ton of time to myself. And it was in that moment then that this entrepreneurial drive kind of leaned back into some of the, we didn't get into it, but some self-taught programming skills that I had developed in middle and high school to say, I wonder if I can start a web development company, or at least do freelance web development work, and fill some of this free time with that, because I've got to do something. I don't sit very well. And so I started up doing freelance web development, and about a month and a half later, Carrie finished up school. We both moved back to Grand Rapids, and the church was gracious enough to take me back on staff. And so while I don't recommend to anybody quit your job for just a quick temporary, like get married a few months sooner, I have no regrets. It worked out lovely.
So, but I'm curious where your like conversations with the Lord were in that time, where you said you had done all of this like pre-work and this path to counseling, and then the rubber meets the road, and then you realize like, hey, I don't know if I want to do counseling. Was that? Tell me about a little bit about that time there, because you're dabbling now in the web design stuff, and it sounds like you went back to the church and you became a youth pastor, right? But was there a little bit of a, maybe not a doubt, but like a question of, okay, I thought I was supposed to do this, but apparently it's not,
it would make a lot of sense for me to have some concerns and big frustrations in that moment.
You were fine.
To be honest, I don't remember a lot of those because I don't think they were there. They came out later, and we'll get to that. But had I been more uptight about career trajectory, I probably would not have moved to Ann Arbor to begin with, quitting a job that I truly loved. And so ignorance was probably a bit of bliss there of not really having a firm comparison to where I thought I should have been. I just knew I loved web design. I leaned into that, found a couple of clients, and so really enjoyed that. And so when we moved back then to Grand Rapids, I went back on staff with the church full time, but continued doing freelance web development on the side. And so I was in this hybrid, and I joke, only half jokingly, that I love student ministry, but sometimes it's frustrating because you advise students on how to live their life, and they listen to you sometimes. Nights and weekends, then I can go to a computer and tell it what to do, and it listens to me always. And so the programming was a cathartic experience for what wasn't happening in the church, in the student ministry department. I lived in this dual world for a while and really, really did enjoy it. And we hit this point where we came to the end of the year. It's like January 2nd. We're looking at our income from the prior year. And I'll use some real numbers here just because I think it helps paint paint the picture.
This is your personal income.
This is
you
personal
and your wife,
income.
You're kind of talking about that. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, and specifically from my job or jobs given the church plus the web development. So from the church, I had made right about $50,000 that year. I looked at it from the freelance web development work that I had done, and I had made $51,000. Mm-hmm. And there was this mental shift that happened in my brain where up until that point, I had always assumed my side job was my side job. It belonged on the side. But when I saw that number eclipse my salary for the year, something shifted to say, what if I do this full time? And is there a career there? And so I thought and prayed about this not long enough and went to my boss. His name's Brady. And I have all the respect in the world for him. And it was like a Thursday. I said, can we grab lunch today? And, as a boss, those are words that give you a little bit of fear and trepidation about what might come. And I'm sure Brady felt that to a degree, and rightly so.
Especially when your best people say that, right?
Yeah. No, I'd like to think that he saw me in that category. And so later that day, over a couple of slices of pizza, I said, I really find that I'm enjoying this web development world, and I'd like to go after this full time. And so I'd like to put in my notice for quitting. Now, the youth ministry world is much like the education world in that there is a right time to quit, and it's summer. And so we had this conversation in February. And so I was essentially giving like a 3-4 months advanced notice. Yeah. And while Brady was sad, he was professional and said, it makes sense. I understand. And so we started going down this route. I began telling people internally on staff, but I didn't tell any students, and I didn't tell certainly their families either about this shift. And fast forward 2.5-3 months to a few weeks prior to summer. It was a Monday morning that I was going to send out an email to all of the families who are connected with the ministry, and announcing my departure. And I woke up that day with this deep lack of peace over this direction, and I dropped my wife off at work and kind of went through the day with almost this like low to mid-grade depression, just totally out of the blue. The day prior to that, I was fine. Nothing felt right about this decision. And there's been a few moments in life where the Holy Spirit's guidance felt so palpable, and this Monday was one of those days. I picked Carrie up, my wife, up at the end of the day from work, and she looked at my face and she said, "What is wrong?" I said, I don't feel any peace with this. I called up my boss, Brady, and with my tail between my legs said, "Brady, can I unquit?"
Had you already sent the email at this point?
I had not sent the email.
Okay.
And Brady was so gracious, said, "Absolutely, we'd love to have you back." What was interesting is around the same time, I was going through a leadership study with some of the other leaders in the church that our then executive pastor was leading. And it was looking at the life of Moses. And it was specifically looking at Moses's early, kind of first half of his life, where he's growing up under the roof of the palace. And he has this Israelite identity to him. He knows he's an Israelite, but he has this special privilege being raised by Pharaoh's daughter. And Moses goes out, he sees an Egyptian beating an Israelite. He goes, he kills the Egyptian, buries him in the sand. And if you just stop there for a moment and think about it, and we normally don't do this in this story, we just say, "Moses, you're a jerk. Why'd you do that? You're going to get found out." But think about what Moses is doing. He's an Israelite, and he has this built-in desire to rescue his people. The problem is he did it in his own way and in his own timing. He went out, killed the Egyptian, buried him, his own way, his own timing. God said, nope, that's not the plan. Moses flees to Midian 40 years later, comes back and follows God's plan and God's timing, which leads to the Exodus story that we have in our scripture.
Yeah.
And as I overlay that on my own story, I was certainly not leading an enslaved people group out of bondage. So let's not overdo it here. But there was something God ordained, God-given in this drive towards technology. But I mentioned I prayed about it and thought about it not long enough and not hard enough.
Yeah.
I was doing it in my own plan and in my own timing.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what the bigger plan was. I just knew that this was not the right time.
Yeah.
And so, tail between my legs, can I unquit? Absolutely. And I continued on at the church.
All right.
So, moving from there,
Yeah.
a couple years later, we, as a church, moved our legacy software system out and a new one in. And for listeners, watchers who might not be familiar with church software, essentially every church has some software that is kind of the database of all the people in the church, handles online giving, handles child check-in, registration for events, that sort of thing. And we had switched to a different software at the church, and every Tuesday we would, as a student ministry team, circle up and talk about the weekend and what went well and what didn't. And time and again on these Tuesday morning meetings, the topic around the circle was an airing of grievances over the software and over how frustrating it was, over how slow it was. And, we're a big church. At the time, we had 80 or 90 staff, right? That allows you to specialize. You can have tech people. You can have a database person. And we're still struggling on this level.
And not only you're someone that does technology, you're doing web development, that time you're like, hey, I know how we can change this. We can do it better, right?
That's exactly right. As I'm listening to this frustration, meanwhile, I'm thinking, I build software that achieves goals not too dissimilar from this on the side. And so given that, it didn't take too long to put the two pieces together and say, if a large church, a mega church, is struggling with software like this, my goodness, how on earth does a typical smaller mid-sized church do this well? And so with that in hand, I started diverting that night and weekend time from doing client work under the freelance business to creating a product specifically designed for the small and mid-sized church to serve them well with church management software. And so my risk up front was not a bunch of capital that I needed to invest. I think my total out-of-pocket cost was $7 a month for some shared host. Right? And I'm a huge fan, Mike, a huge fan of de-risking the startup journey.
Yeah.
I talk to so many founders who are looking to put thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars into a venture. And while there can be a place and time for that, there's a lot to be said for wading in and making sure that your idea actually has traction. So started nights and weekends building out this software. And over the course of the next 8 months or so, built out what in startup world we call our MVP, minimum viable product, which is kind of what's the bare bones that you can do that is still marketable, that still delivers your value proposition. After those 8 months, I began connecting with local area churches, sitting down with them and showing them what I had built. And there's different ways to do this. I might even do it differently if I did it again. But I said, hey, here's what I built. You can use it for free. All I am looking for in terms of compensation is feedback. And I wanted to know if I built something of value or a big digital paperweight and I should move on. Yeah. And so after meeting with some of these churches, there were a few that signed up. And, signed up. Yes, I'll use your software and give you feedback is what that meant. And I received really valuable feedback. That was 8 months in. we did that for 3 months. And so at the 11th month mark, it marked the moment when I went out to a church and I sat down with them and I did the whole spiel. But then at the end, instead of saying, you can have it for free, I just need feedback, I said, and that will be $50 per month if you sign up. And the pastor looked at me and he said, that sounds good to me. And in my
What's that moment right there? You're like, whoa.
In my mind, I said, really? Like real American US dollars? There is nothing more exhilarating to that entrepreneurial mind than to have a product you develop. You're not commissioned to do it. You develop it and to put it out there and for someone to say, yes, I'm going to validate that with money. It's just huge.
Yeah.
And that's why I even say in the testing that I did for the 3 months prior to this, if I did it again, I might ask for money sooner just as a form of validation.
Yeah.
And so by the end of the first calendar year, not only that first church, but a second church had signed up. I was raking in $100 per month. It had not yet eclipsed the client work that I had said goodbye to, nor could it even pay for all that much, but it was something. It was then the coming months where I leaned into online advertising and realized that, yes, there is product market fit here.
Yeah.
But it was also a crazy season because I was the only person. Yeah. And so I was taking sales, I was taking support, I was legal for whatever smidgen of time that got allocated. And I was admin, I was all of it.
Were you still, you're still a youth pastor this time,
I'm
right?
still a full-time youth pastor.
Yeah.
And when I started writing that first line of code, my wife and I had just had our first daughter. She was 3 months old.
All right.
And by the time what was it? The following year, we had about 15 churches on the platform.
Yeah.
We just had twins. 21 months after
so those were
having
number
our first.
2 and 3.
So number
then.
2 and
Okay.
3.
Wow.
So we have 3 kids.
Wow.
Now they are age 12 and almost 11 for the twins.
Okay.
But at that time, that was just the absolute chaos. 3 in diapers, trying to wear all of these hats, working full time at the church, wanting to truly do a great job serving these students, nights and weekends, building out the software because it wasn't done. It was the MVP, minimum viable product. I had a lot more vision that needed to go into this. It was utterly exhausting and exhilarating at the same time.
So tell me about the peace level at that time. So previously, you were gonna quit your job. It was not the Lord's time. It was the Holy Spirit was basically saying, not yet. This is not the right path. Now you fast forward. You're in a time where you're seemingly drowning. I would imagine. Having young kids myself. Having multiple kids in diapers. It's like now you're trying to run a business. Like you're trying to manage all that. I think in those times I've seen. The only time I've been able to, survive those periods that are extremely stressful are like with the power of the Holy Spirit, with, leaning on Christ. And so tell me about that when clearly this was similar, where it's like you're seeing a path to doing this full time. You're seeing a season shift here in life. Did you have that peace? Did you tell me a little bit more about dig a little deeper in that time there?
We were still trying to figure out what this was. I wasn't necessarily stepping into this thinking I'm going to start a company. I simply saw a need and wanted to build a product that could fill it. I had a lot of peace in the overall direction. I wasn't wrestling in the same way that I had a couple of years ago. The question didn't even come to my mind, but it was utterly exhausting. And so it was right in the midst of this that a friend of a friend down in Atlanta gave me a call. And they ran an outsourced accounting company, so kind of adjacent to the church world. They served a lot of churches. And he called me up and he said, Jon, I'm interested in investing or acquiring your company. We had like 15 or 20 churches at this time, right? And so pretty early on, and I'm exhausted running all these areas of life. My wife is a saint, but she was exhausted as well.
Yeah.
We've got 3 littles under the age of 2. No, in fact, when they called, the twins hadn't even been born yet. She was like 12 months pregnant. Like she was almost there. And so we flew down to Atlanta to meet with this guy. It was literally the last week that Carrie was allowed to fly, given where she was at in the pregnancy. Wow. And so they take us down, and they did the classic tour of the office, take us out to a steak dinner. And then we stayed in a hotel. The next day, we come back to the office, and we sit down in this conference room. And on their side of the table, there were 3 people. There were the 2 business partners, who, by the way, are both bankers, and so very financially astute. And then next to them was their attorney. On our side of the table was youth pastor Jon and his pregnant wife. Right. To say there was a power mismatch at this table would be the understatement of the world. And so they looked at us and they said, "We like what you've built. We'd like to give an offer to acquire the majority of your company." And they wrote a number down on paper and they slid it over to us. The number was bigger than what my annual salary was at the church, but not a lot bigger. And it really forced this moment of, what have we built?
Yeah.
Have we built a side project? In which case, great. Take the money and move on to the next thing. Or have we started a tech company? In which case, if this is an exit, this is way too premature. And we didn't have clarity over that. In fact, Carrie and I disagreed a bit about how to navigate this. And so we...
What was her disagreement? Like, what? Tell me about that. Because do you have a basis for, you said, did we start a tech company? Obviously, you're a developer at that time, you're starting a company, but what was your knowledge or insights on, building and scaling and exiting a company? I mean, obviously now you have a lot of expertise in that. Go back to that. Did you have any basis for that? Was your wife saying like, "Hey, this is a lot of money. We could, do X, Y, or Z"? Like, tell me a little bit about that. Like, where was that at?
I don't even think when I started this whole thing, I knew you could sell a company. Yeah. I didn't build this to sell it. I built it to help churches.
Right.
And so,
which made it a good product. I mean, I think that's what made it successful from what I could tell.
And I think that's a great point, that if you're a founder and you're chasing money, you don't have enough chutzpah, grit, stick-with-itness to actually push through when it gets hard, because there's easier ways to make money than to start companies. Like probably all the other ways to make money are easier than starting a company. So to lean into that, Carrie at this point was just exhausted, right? Like, she's super pregnant. Twins are on the way. I have been, head down building this product for the prior 15 months. She sees an off-ramp to that. Yeah. She sees a route where, I could get my husband back a little bit more and we could get some extra cash.
Yeah.
That looked pretty good to her.
Yeah.
It wasn't so much about the money as much as it was about time and where that was allocated. Whereas for me, I'm in it. So I get to feel the exhilaration of that a bit more. And I'm closer to it. So I get to see the vision of what it could be. Yeah. And so I found myself leaning more towards, pushing this forward. But I didn't want to do it, by just dragging my wife along. I wanted to be united with her. In fact, I'm not sure I could have done it without being in unity with her. It's really hard to start a company, and if you're not in lockstep with your spouse, you've given up one of the greatest strengths that you can have.
Yeah.
And so we flew back to Michigan without clarity on that decision. And I reached out to my alma mater, Calvin University. And I said, hey, I didn't graduate with anything that even rhymes with business. When I switched from psychology, I did not switch into business. Let's be clear. And so when so I didn't graduate with anything related to business. Is there somebody here that I can talk to that will be able to give some perspective on this decision that we have.
Yeah.
And so just to pause on that, when you get stuck and you're not sure where to go, find somebody who is older, wiser, has done that before, and lean into their mentorship. I mean, that's the principle. That's the trait that is kind of evergreen in this space. Have the humility to ask. And so Calvin said, absolutely. They connected me with a marketing professor named Tom Betts, and we met over at Starbucks in Grand Rapids here. And we sit across the table from each other and exchange pleasantries, and I brought the numbers and trajectory of where we're going, and I showed Tom this, and he looked it over, and he said, Jon, I think you've got something here I wouldn't sell. And so I went home, and Carrie and I chatted, and to her credit, she said, okay, let's go.
Yeah.
There haven't been a lot of moments in life where Carrie and I have just seen things differently. Yeah. Most of the time we kind of journey that together and come along. This was one of the very few times where she said, I don't see it the same, but I'm going to trust you. And so let's do this.
Yeah.
And I can't thank her enough for that. That was a major sacrifice because she knew that she was signing up for more of what she had experienced over the last few months.
Which I think is a good point because, I mean, I appreciate you saying that, but you talk about like your spouse's role in any kind of work, but in like a startup is that, that's a hard role for them because they're sometimes seeing all of the negatives and all of the downsides of those early days, which is, and she's pregnant on top of that, and has a young one running around, right? Yep. So then it's like she might be getting, the leftovers from Jon. I'm not trying to say that that's how you're acting, but that's an easy tendency to where she had that feeling like I could get my husband back. I can get off of all of this. When you were saying, hey, I have all this passion, kind of for growing this. So then being able to equalize that a little bit. And then she's saying, hey, I'll meet you. I'll put more effort into this because I see where your heart is and what you want to do. I think for me in my journey, even with my spouse, like there's an easy tendency to like dump, the negative of work and all of that. And while that's, I think you need to support each other, spouses need to support each other. And that's like extremely valuable to have your spouse's support. That's been my experience.
Yeah.
But if you overdo that, that's a really bad thing. It can bode really not well down the road. Does that make sense?
Sure. You don't want to just treat it as a complaint session for all the things that are going wrong. And to that end, Carrie was and has and continues to be a wonderful sounding board.
Yeah.
And so it's not just the complaints, but it's also the ideation that she helps me process through, and is, in terms of people, the greatest advocate and support that I ever had in the business world. So,
yeah, that's amazing.
So I call Atlanta. I say thanks, but no thanks. And we put our head down and say, this is not a hobby. This is a startup. But life is still crazy, and I'm still full time at the church. And I hit this moment, Mike, where I had set up the platform so that churches can come and try the software out without anybody guiding them through. They can start an instant demo of it. And when they did so, they'd have to tell me their name, phone number, and email. And then I set it up so I would get a text message immediately when they jump into the software.
Yeah.
And I would play this mental game of I would get the text, and I would wait a couple minutes, imagining them clicking through and getting deeper and deeper into the software. And then I would call them. And I would say, hey, this is Jon, the founder of the software is called Breeze, Breeze. Hey, this is Jon, founder of Breeze. Noticed you were checking out our demo and wanted to know if you had any questions or feedback. Okay. this would totally freak some people out, right? They feel like daddy's watching and, there's a satellite zoomed in on their house, on their screen. Yeah. It wasn't quite that complex, right? But nonetheless, I would call. And it was amazingly helpful, simply from a business standpoint, to get feedback from not only people who were really excited, but also from those who were just tacitly checking it out, who would never call the line. I was able to get feedback from them. And
had just experienced it. Like they had the immediate feedback.
They were there,
right? There.
Right? Yeah. Their mind was there. But then I hit this point where these texts and support calls and sales calls were starting to hit my phone more and more frequently. And in my day job at the church, I'd be in important meetings with staff, and we're talking about important things about how to plan the upcoming weekend or what needs to be improved from the past. And in my pocket, my phone is buzzing.
Buzz, buzz, yeah.
And so my future is in my pocket, my present is on the table, and eventually something had to give. And it was in this midst that I said, I can't do justice to my day job anymore. I have to step out. Yeah. And there's a cool God story in that in and of itself, where I took a part-time job at another church nearby that coincidentally Brady, my boss, a year prior had stepped into as their pastor. They already had a youth pastor, but she was relatively new in the field and needed essentially a youth pastor consultant. Yeah. Part-time.
That's perfect.
I had a lot of expertise in the youth ministry world, but I didn't have the time. I could only offer part-time. And so I went over to that church and got a whole bunch of time back that I was then able to devote into the software and hiring people and building out this team. Yeah. And so, there's a million lessons and stories I could get into, but for the sake of time, this was at the point where we really put heads down, and I began my metamorphosis from youth pastor to CEO. And it started with me being a developer plus sales plus support. And then started hiring some people to help out with the support. And so then I was developer and sales and, still admin. And then we hired someone to help out with sales. And then we hired someone to help out with admin. And I kept on replacing the jobs that I had that were not leadership. There's a great book called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber.
It was a great one.
It's been out for a while now, but I still recommend it because it talks about how do you work on the business, not simply in the business. Yeah. Because if you work in the business, you will wear all the hats forever. But if you start working on the business, it gives you a very tactical plan for how do you fill those positions with other people. And so that's exactly what I did. Yeah. And the team grew from simply me and a really supportive wife and little rugrats running around our house to a team of nearly 50 of us who were spread out across the country. We were a remote team before remote was cool, pre-COVID. And we had an absolute blast. And I fell in love not simply with the technical aspects of this, and not even only with the missional aspect, although both of those were true, but I fell in love with the ability to create a culture in a company that is Christ-centered and that treats people with dignity. I wanted to create a place that, as much as it was in my power, people loved to come to work every single day. Because as business owners, we have a tremendous opportunity, and I would even argue mandate to offer a work environment that allows people to do their very best work, that allows them to thrive. And when you're the tip of the pyramid on the org chart, you are the one who's ultimately in charge of what that culture looks like. Yeah.
Culture is what you tolerate, right? As the old adage goes.
Culture is what you tolerate.
In the workplace and in the home, right? Like as fathers, that's I think a big part of it. So tell me a little bit about like how does all that flow? So for sake of time or just to, I'm sure there's a lot of in-depth we could go with some of that. But so you grow Breeze, you guys have an exit, and then you get into Startup Garage.
Yeah, let me zoom in on.
So I know I'm skipping over a lot, but I want to get to the Startup Garage stuff.
Yeah, let me zoom in on a
bit.
couple of moments prior to that because it helps lay the groundwork for what would come later.
Yeah.
Was continuing to run the company. I love creating things. I'm not a strong maintainer. And so we hit this point about 7 years in. It was 2020. Our family is very beginning of 2020. Things had not shut down yet. Our family's down in Florida for vacation. And night after night, I found myself inspired by what the future of the company could be. Because I was getting bored at this point. We were a little more in maintenance mode. Everything was going great. Business was great. Numbers were continuing to go up and to the right, but I was getting bored. And so I mentioned earlier, there's been just a few moments where I've felt the Holy Spirit's guiding. This was one of them. Night after night, I found myself writing about the future. And my vision for the company would be that we would take the software company, partition it into two parts. One part would continue to be software that serves churches. The other part would be an incubator to help Christ-centered founders start companies of their own. And we would take the excess revenue from the software side and use it to fuel these up-and-coming founders.
Okay.
And I got really excited about this, came back from Florida, got the whole team together, pitched it, Breeze 2030. This is our 10-year plan of what we're going to be moving into. And then May 19 of 2021 happened. So Friday morning, I woke up with this deep sense of peace that was, Jon, if you want to sell the company, that's okay. And that was a foreign idea to me. We were at a point in the tech industry where we were getting multiple inquiries each week about selling, and it was just an easy no.
Yeah.
It wasn't
just because
on
they
the
weren't going
radar.
to carry on like the vision of what you guys wanted to do. Like, did it feel wrong? Like, tell me a little bit about why it was easy no.
Yeah. They were almost entirely from private equity. And private equity certainly has a space in the marketplace, but oftentimes, and certainly my impression of it at that point, was they wanted to buy it for profit maximization. Even if that meant at the expense of the mission or the culture that we had built. And so, like I said earlier, I didn't build this to sell it. I built it to magnify the impact of the church. And so they were easy no's. Now, throughout the years, there would be occasionally other Christian tech companies that would reach out and want to build a relationship. And so we had good relationships with some of these companies. And so on this Friday, May 19, when I sensed this sense of peace around this, Carrie and I prayed about this, we fasted, and that peace really held firm. And so I reached out to 5 companies that I really respected in this space. So not private equity, but missionally aligned companies. And very privately just said, hey, I'm kind of considering an exit. If you'd have any interest in acquiring our company, the conversation's on the table. Well, that resulted in 5 IOIs. IOI is indication of interest. It's kind of like the middle school equivalent of sending a note that says, I like you, do you like me?
Yeah, check yes or no.
And, yeah, right. And so we got 5 yes checks back.
Right.
And so with that, we brought in then an external company to help kind of manage this process, and they were really the chaperones in the room, right? Like they help vet these different companies and who makes sense to move forward with and who doesn't. And they did an incredible job being exactly that, the chaperones. And I've never felt like the pretty girl in the middle of the room until that moment where you've got all these suitors who originally have the check yes, I like you, and then would move on to all have LOIs, which is a letter of intent, which is essentially the proposal. Here's the ring. And so now we have 5 rings being offered to us as well.
Should choose one.
And typically you only choose one.
Yeah.
And so thinking, all right, how do we navigate this? Man, if I again only jokingly say, if you ever want to grow your faith, try to sell a company, because as you wade through this due diligence and working to evaluate the different companies, you're wrestling with factors like, how are they going to treat my baby? What's the cost the price that they're going to pay? And the most helpful tool that I had to evaluate which of these parties makes sense to sell to comes from a book called Finish Big. It's got a whale on the front of it. If you search Amazon, you'll find it.
Yeah.
And in the opening sections of that book, there are these 4 principles that I call the NAME principle, NAME. N is for what's next. Are you excited about doing something different? A is for accomplished. Have you accomplished what you set out to with your company? M is for money. Does the amount that they're offering make sense relative to the value of your company? And E is employees. Will they take care of your team? So what's next? Have you accomplished what you wanted? Are they offering money that is a good deal? And will they take care of your team? E, your employees. And so in wrestling with that and looking at these different companies, we eventually selected one. Tithely is the name of the company, who largely focused on the church donation world and had a kind of fledgling church management side. We largely focused on the church management side and had a more fledgling donation side. And so in many ways, it was a great match with a missional focus to it.
Yeah.
And so August 31st,
2021?
Of 2021.
Okay.
Yep, August 31st, 2021. End of that summer. We all hopped on a Zoom call with the other party, us, and then about 15 lawyers and accountants and the works. We gave the final signatures. They gave the final wire transfer, and the deal was done.
Wow.
And we closed the laptop with a sense of, wow, what an adventure. About 10 years later from that first line of code. And then the question, now what? For the last 10 years, so much of my identity had been wrapped up in being a tech entrepreneur, a CEO of Breeze. And now all of that was gone. I was with the company for 3 months to help with the transition and then out. And that was by design because I was restless.
Yeah.
I was looking for something new. But I didn't know what that new thing was. In fact, if I were to I don't have many regrets about how we ran Breeze, but one of them would have been after it hit more of a sustainable mark, that I would have been a bit more exploratory in different hobbies because I just poured everything into this. And so when it disappeared, I was at a loss of where do I go? Yeah. But rewind the tape. I was a youth pastor before. I had this big heart for students. I, of course, have a big heart for Christ. And throughout this near decade-long process, I developed a big heart for business and what can happen when you have a Christ-centered approach to it. And so I reached back out to Tom Betts, the same professor who I had met with at Starbucks about selling or not. And I said, well, Tom, you were right. Thank you. That was good advice you gave, now 9 years ago.
Look at where it got me. You gave me advice. Look at where it got me.
Turns out that other exit would have been premature, and this was a better deal because it was quite a bit more than my annual salary at the church. And then I said, I love Jesus. I love students, and I love business. What's happening at university? And a couple of conversations later, I found myself sitting with some just top-notch students who were in the business school and asking them that same question. And one of them looked at me. His name's Daniel Quick. Great entrepreneur. He's now graduated and off doing wonderful things. And Daniel looked at me and he said, Jon, we have all of these opportunities to learn about business and entrepreneurship, but we don't have opportunities to actually do it. And all of a sudden, all of those pages that I had written back in early 2020 about partitioning Breeze and being an incubator and helping Christ-centered founders came pouring back. And my original vision was that the revenue from Breeze would help start a Christ-centered incubator.
Yeah.
Little did I know that's exactly how God worked it, only in his plan and his timing.
Yeah.
Carrie and I stepped in and said, we'd love to make a donation to help get this off the ground. And that is the Startup Garage.
Wow.
And the vision for the Startup Garage began with helping Calvin students lean in and start their own businesses, but quickly expanded out to saying we don't want this to be limited to one specific school or even schools in general. We want this to be the ecosystem for Christ-centered entrepreneurs to lean on and to support them as they pursue their ventures. And we want to help them with wherever they're at, be that capital, be that advice, be that help in hiring, or simply understanding the basics.
Yeah.
And so, among other things, one of the most satisfying areas that I get to help with now is in the Startup Garage and pouring into students. And in some ways, I feel like a youth pastor again, that I've come full circle. I'm hanging out with students on Wednesday night, eating pizza and talking about life. But it's business that brings us to the table, but still with that Christ-centered focus.
What do you feel like is the, when that guy said, we're learning all these things in books and we're learning all these opportunities, or we're learning all about business, but not given the opportunity to do it. What do you think the barrier was? Was it a mixture of things? Because you have all of this academic knowledge about business, and you can read about it in a textbook, but ultimately you need like capital, you need connections, you need the marketing professor that's going to tell you this is a good deal or a bad deal. Can you speak to what you felt like was the void that was missing there? Because obviously it's produced universities produce like business graduates that go out and do things, but there is a component to a Startup Garage type startup studio or whatever you might label it that is bringing to the table all those things in a special way that is mixing them all together. It's not just a scholarship fund. It's not just an investment fund.
Yeah.
It's all these things.
That's a great question, and one I've not been asked before. Early in the Startup Garage, I sat down with a student named Cam. Cam had just finished a summer of pressure washing for other people. And it sparked an idea of what if I can create an app that allows people who need tasks like pressure washing, window washing, weeding, raking, whatever it is, connect those homeowners with people in the community who are interested in doing those tasks.
Yeah.
This was simply an app idea. A lot of people have app ideas.
Yeah.
A lot of people have business ideas in general. But your question is, what was missing previously that wasn't allowing ideas like Cam's to be manifested as actually something in the world? And so Cam and I sat down, and he shared this idea with me. And I think the difference in the answer to your question is my response, which was, Cam, this is a great idea. You should do it. By that I mean somebody to believe in these students and to expect it out of them. Because there is, even in more seasoned professionals, there is this imposter syndrome where you think, no, I couldn't do it. I'm not ready. I'm not an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
But when you have someone who looks at you and says, no, you have what it takes, that's great. And Calvin has wonderful professors, but when you set up a program that's intentionally positioned to pour into these students and not only that, expects it out of them, expects businesses to be created from what they're doing, it changes it all. We offered capital as part of this program to students to be able to get off the ground. Some take it, but not enough for me to look at you and say, capital's the difference. They just didn't have the money.
Yeah.
Right? We offer expertise. but not enough that is meaningfully different from what they might get if they set up a private meeting with another professor.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really intelligent professors at Calvin who I have loads of respect for. The difference is that there's a program that expects this out of them and believes in these students.
Yeah. And I think too, like being an operator, and I know that what you've done with Startup Garage is part of that ecosystem is bringing in fellow entrepreneurs to help with some of that, right?
Yeah.
So advice from a professor is one thing. Advice from someone that's like an operator or a relatively new operator, you know, of a very similar thing that you're trying to do, whether it's an app or something, or maybe it's actual hardware, you know, that is extremely valuable, that also your values aligned with, right?
Yeah.
Someone that's saying, hey, you should do it. I'm going to hold you to the standard, but I'm also going to guide you in a way that's our values are aligned, not like just maximizing profits or whatever it is, which I know that's intertwined in the Startup Garage ecosystem with Calvin, is that, hey, this is not just about money here. This is a holistic thing. And I think that's a very powerful ingredient that you can't really do with just the university setting, right? With just professors, with just academics. Those are like table stakes, and those are very good. It's not to say those are lacking, but you have this whole other like dynamic at play.
I'm glad you brought that up, because these students for their entire lives essentially get told the message of work hard to get good grades so you can get a good job and you can, you know, pay for your lifestyle.
Yeah.
That's it. And that's great. We need the majority of people to go that route, right? To be employees. But it suppresses an alternate narrative, and that is dream, do your due diligence on that idea, and then start it and launch it.
Yeah.
And what we gain by having entrepreneurs come in and share their story is that if entrepreneurship is a highway, these students need on-ramps to get onto that highway. And no two entrepreneurs have the same story. And so we have one entrepreneur who comes and shares how they took over their dad's fledgling business and developed it into this massive, you know, name brand, which is the story behind Howie's hockey tape, right?
Yeah.
And so Max shares his story there, and it opens up pathways in students' minds in terms of taking something small and making it big. You have another entrepreneur who comes in and shares their story of starting something while they were in college, of selling cupcakes to other people.
Yeah.
And Leanne's Cupcakes came out of that, and she started as Calvin Cupcakes, and now it's College Cupcakes. And it connects to other wires that you didn't see before.
Yeah.
And then you have someone who comes and talks about loving interior decorating and then getting picked up by a TV show. And that's Gene Stouffer with Magnolia Network. And it opens up other pathways. And so the goal is that after you hear 6 or 12 of these entrepreneurs, you have 12 different on-ramps and a much more accessible way to get on the entrepreneurial highway.
Yeah. And those things are ever changing, those on-ramps, right? So like those paths that were maybe traditional are now changing, whether it's like different business models, different paths to the consumer, different forms of media. All of these things are so dynamic that you have to increase your surface area for even exposure to what are the alternative methods. Like you don't know what you don't know, right? Which I think is all of those things you just described, we're all probably utilizing some uniqueness of something that didn't exist 10 years ago in a way that it was done, or way that it was marketed, or, you know, the way they're getting customers, which I think is super fascinating when you talk to like these studios, like, you know, what you guys are doing is it's like a hotbed of new ideas that are thinking outside the box, right? Which I think is very cool.
It's dynamic, it changes, but the common denominator with all of this is helping students believe they can do it. Whether it is a one-on-one conversation like with Cam saying, this is a great idea, you should go for it, or whether it's a speaker who comes in. And I love to start the speakers by asking, please start with your junior or senior year of college and take us from there, because it's showing them how they moved from that point into entrepreneurship, all of which paints a picture of what's possible for these students and raises the mental ceiling.
That's awesome. Well, I love the work you're doing, Jon, and it's just so cool that it's right here in our backyard. And I appreciate you coming in today, man.
Yeah, Mike, thanks so much.
Yeah.
This has been a pleasure. I appreciate all that you're doing as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Jon.